Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Sean Blackburn with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Tom Geary. He is the founder and executive creative director over at School of Thought. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing really well, Sean. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm excited. Today we're talking about B2B advertising and how forgettable a lot of it is and really how to avoid it. But before we begin, could you tell our listeners a little bit about you and what you guys do over at School of Thought?
Sure. Well, my background is as a creative. I've worked at a lot of big agencies, Goodby, McCann, Butler Shine, lots of different places around the country. But I think I've got the entrepreneurial gene, and I worked at McCann on, there were 600 of us, and it's pretty hard to move the needle when you're at such an enormous shop. It's like turning a super tanker. So I opened School of Thought in 2009 because my sense of timing is amazing. We had a foundation client that was a B2B company. It's an actuarial consulting company, and we've been working with them ever since, and just kind of grown organically ever since then.
I love it. Yeah, I saw that on your site, and I did chuckle at the timing of opening that up. I'm sure that was a challenge.
But on the other hand, we had about 20% growth every year, so I can't complain. It's kind of nice to have a hand in your destiny a little more directly.
I love that. Yeah. So congrats on all the growth that you guys have had. And today we're talking about B2B advertising, and I can sometimes see my own eyes glossing over when I'm looking at plenty of B2B advertising. So I'm excited for you to unpack, some of your thoughts on how to avoid, like you mentioned, the forgettable B2B advertising, and maybe just, help us define the problem. What is it that you see that B2B brands do not understand in the big picture when it comes to their advertising and marketing?
Wow, how much time do we have? The hard drive is going to fill up, Sean. No, I think the problem is people forget the humanity. They think, B2B, there's, it's a different thing. Well, no, not really. We're all speaking to humans. It's about emotional connection, or it should be. And yet there's been this perfect storm, I think, where, at least in the tech space, something that we're pretty familiar with out here in San Francisco, there's this notion our tech is special, data is everything, and we can do it in-house. And, the answer to each of those things is no, and maybe.
Right.
And that this, sort of collective groupthink has just really made the landscape pretty mundane. I mean, how many of us have seen ads about the Gartner Magic Quadrant? I was having lunch with an old friend of mine, and we were just like shaking our heads. And he's actually in-house now at a tech company, and that's all people talk about is we're in this quadrant of Gartner, or we're the choice of the Fortune 500. 90%. Well, so is Alhambra Water. Everybody is, and it's when everyone's saying the same thing, your brand is going to be so much wallpaper.
Right. And maybe just to back it up, even maybe just define for our audience what that Gartner Magic Quadrant is.
There are a lot of consulting firms like Forrester Research and Gartner. They do sort of an objective analysis of companies and how they're performing and how their technologies perform. Think JD Power, but get wonkier. Right. And and it's not dissimilar to where how many times have we all heard JD Power, JD Power, JD Power, and it takes millions and millions of impressions to make something really stick. It's great to have the awards, but it shouldn't be your lead. It's like going on a date and leading with, have you seen my Porsche? No, that's not going to go over well.
Right.
It's a great point of distinction. It's something to kind of talk about a little further down the funnel, but there's a better way to kind of hook people.
Absolutely. So you mentioned kind of a good news and bad news of the state of B2B advertising and really moving the needle. Maybe what's in your mind the good and bad news?
Right. Well, from the perspective of a marketer, or from my perspective, selfishly, it's pretty hard to move the needle for, say, Nike. They've done some extraordinary work. They are where they are.
Right.
We come up with something crushingly good, and it's going to affect their brand, a tenth of 1%. But the landscape of B2B marketing is so woeful, frankly, that there's a great opportunity. You can be completely differentiate yourselves within, the VoIP phone category or whatever it is, if you are willing to take some risks. You have to kind of back up, take a breath, and evaluate the landscape. But the bar is so low. There's a great opportunity to be distinct, and not enough people are doing it. I think one of the reasons is kind of this follow the herd mentality, which is problematic.
Right.
A lot of the time, I was talking about in-house, it's really hard. It's very challenging even to have a talented in-house team. And I know a lot of people, I've worked in-house. I worked in-house as a division of Adobe. I'm the same writer, here that I was there. But when you're on the team, it's like you're on the Cleveland Browns, the assistant coach or whatever. You have to have hope. You're inside the bubble. You lose perspective, and then plus somebody's giving you stock options. So the cultural effect and the sort of the groupthink makes it really hard to get the perspective that you need, I think, my opinion, to really have effective communications.
I love that. And just even using the Browns as an analogy was genius on your own part.
Well, actually, a good friend of mine, I just lost, sadly, and she was a lifelong Browns fan. And so I'm kind of thinking of her with that reference.
Yeah,
but it's true. It's easy to
our Cleveland listeners, but
exactly. It's
a pain point, certainly.
And they seem to be turning around. So I could use, frankly, the 49ers these days. Everyone has, so it's pretty easy to lose hope. And I've been there. I've been inside the bubble when the CEO comes in and slams open the door and says, I just got an email from somebody, a famous tech person, somebody we've all heard of, and he's bothered by the bugs that we happen to have in our latest product. And, so guess what, guys? You're going to do an ad on, this update to this fix to the product. And guess what? That's what everyone went out with that day. And, it was reacting to a fire drill. It didn't have anything to do with what was the best for the brand. It was another example of sort of reacting rather than backing up and saying, hey, is this really going to move the needle for us? Or are we just firefighting?
And I think that definitely speaks to, some of the disconnect that we see between, advertising that we know is forgettable, we know is bad, but yet it's still so common. And I think that's a good distinction that, this groupthink or herd mentality is what eventually gets us to that point. Now, what's some of the ways that you've consulted some of your clients or even yourself to kind of break out of that herd mentality and look further down the line to the ultimate impact of the advertising?
It's a good question. I was talking about this sort of fascination with one's technology or whatever the product is. And, of course, it's critical to have a great product. That's the most important part of the product or service. Whatever the offering is the most important part of the marketing mix. And that example that I gave about the tech company with the buggy software, but we were behind the curve there.
Sure.
But beyond that, I think it's just really important for marketers to think about the recipient. If that is the perspective I think that we try and bring to the table. The marketer wants to speak to their target, business decision maker or whatever. We're there as outside consultants to be a proxy for them. and to run everything that is on the table through the will they care filter. That's kind of my big mantra. Is anybody out there going to care? Is this going to resonate with them? Another thing that's really important is making use of emotion. Google, has done a white paper. If anybody lists, this is perhaps the only thing worth remembering from this conversation, but Google from promotion to emotion. And interestingly, Google's own white paper pops up right there at the top of the list, Sean. But they did a study on the effectiveness of B2B advertising, what works and what doesn't. And they said that using emotion is the secret weapon. It is more important to use emotion in B2B space than it is in B2C. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Let's say that we're talking about adopting a cloud offering, right? So we've got, Amazon, AWS, or Azure, or something. There's some enormous procurement thing.
Right.
I'm in procurement. I'm the CIO. My career is over in a heartbeat if I make the wrong decision. Talk about something that is emotionally charged. So if you're not speaking to that CIO about the emotional issues underlying that decision, you're missing the mark.
Right.
So using emotion, I think, is just also really critical. It's the secret sauce, and nobody does that.
Yeah, I think it's in some ways something that our B2C counterparts have always spoken to, or I should say the good ones.
Right.
Are always speaking to. And I think that there is a disconnect sometimes on the B2B side, thinking that it's a different game, but really it's the same game.
And, there are other benefits to this. I mean, we did, this is no big deal to talk about this given the time and so forth, but we did some work for iShares in the middle of the recession. And of course, if you're iShares, you're not doing so well when nobody is trading stocks. Everyone's put their money in cash. And so their team was completely demoralized. So, we came up with some messaging, which was emotional, and talked about what they were doing behind the scenes and so forth. And it made everyone feel better. We had like 95% participation rates. More recently, we've done some work for Milliman, the consulting firm that I was talking about. And it's, a group of actuaries, very kind of wonky and so forth. And sometimes it's hard to kind of think about what it is that they bring to the table, but they can actually objectively analyze things like healthcare and provide answers. And so we've done ads for them. We did an ad to Congress, and it was, send in the actuaries when Congress was in the quagmire of healthcare reform, right? Because these guys could actually make a difference. Now, unfortunately, Congress didn't take our advice and make use of these actuaries to kind of solve healthcare reform. But think how it resonated internally. We're actually making people who are historically kind of behind the scenes, really wonky mathematicians, the smartest people in the room, not always getting the limelight. And we're putting them in their rightful place as kind of people who could be, real heroes and solving the situation. So
absolutely,
it's a great thing. And, we've done some corporate social responsibility efforts for these same guys about getting women into coding and other things. And these films, have the team client side standing up, giving a standing ovation, because it's an opportunity to kind of hold a mirror up and show them that they're actually doing really amazing things. And so, you have an opportunity to make an emotional connection externally with your target audience and also internally with a team that could probably use a boost. So there are just so many reasons to consider making use of emotion in standing out in this sort of B2B landscape.
I love that. I think that the internal side is something that we sometimes don't consider with our advertising, the effects that it has. So that's fascinating.
Hey guys, chances are you're running SEO, PPC, social, email, and other digital channels. So why aren't we spending the same time and attention on our highest converting channel, referrals? We all say we value word of mouth because we know it brings our best leads that end up being our best customers. But most of us aren't using referrals as an active marketing channel. Enter the definitive guide to referral marketing from our friends over at Ambassador. To get your free copy, head over to getambassador.com/growth. You'll learn best practices, tips, and strategies to generate positive and organic word of mouth by building your own scalable referral program. Learn from the world's leading referral company, Ambassador, trusted by leading marketers at HubSpot, Zillow, and Gong.io to build and scale their word of mouth programs. Again, go get your free copy of the definitive guide to referral marketing at getambassador.com/growth. And if you want to talk to their experts there, just drop them a note. All right, let's get back into the show.
To transition a little bit, I know that you talk about the relationship between brand and data, and how some people see that through a shorter term lens or a lens that you think is a little flawed. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and this is coming from the context of a guy who was almost a math major. So I love that. I love data, but it has its place. And I think that there has been this sort of move to it's almost data as the brand. You know, we're going to predictive analytics our way to marketing, and that's not the right way to go in my estimation. I mean, I walk in and I talk to clients, and they're like, you know, their notion of a campaign is Google AdWords, and that's wrong. Google AdWords is table stakes. It is the bare minimum that one should do, and the reason is that brands are inherently emotional. What do I think of Uber? What do I think of Lyft? What do I think of IBM? What do I think of Facebook? You know, insert your brand here.
Apple versus Samsung, yeah.
Apple versus Samsung, exactly right. And it's an emotional positioning in my mind, as the recipient, as the target audience. And if you're not, you're not going to solve that with analytics,
right?
That until computers can make me cry. Maybe I'll revisit my perspective. Where it is right. Critical is, of course, in thinking about our targeting, in our research, in the media planning. All of these things are super important. And so I'm not dismissing data. We're not Luddites here, but I just think that it has to be viewed as a means to an end rather than the end.
No, that makes total sense. I'm curious, if I'm a marketer, and I think many people in our audience are sitting in an organization where they maybe don't love their advertising whenever it's finally done and gone through the entire process. And how would you, sitting in someone's chair like that, set yourself up for success to make a difference, to move the needle?
Well, I think, getting out of the bubble one way or another is really important. Sort of stopping and removing yourself from the equation, removing your team from the equation. One sort of painful example, probably a cheap shot throwing Facebook under the bus, but they had this headline all over San Francisco that said "Fake news is not your friend," and it was an example, I think, of I know a lot of people in-house there, smart, creative marketers, but somehow they lost perspective. But I don't need to know that fake news is not my friend. I'm pretty clear on that.
Right.
Gin clear. What's less clear is why these guys haven't done enough, because they basically fostered this platform that has led to all of this fake news getting distributed and so forth. So they're not thinking about what the audience is going to think. They're not thinking about the relationship that the audience has with their brand or the category. And that's really critical. I've worked at places where people think that the target audience is getting out of bed in the morning to go to our homepage. No, that's not the case, So you need to have somebody who's basically able to have some perspective on where your brand lies in the ecosystem objectively. And that's a great starting point. Again, I was the same writer at Adobe as I am outside of Adobe, but I am more effective with the perspective of a little distance. So having that perspective, I think, is really critical. I think, hopefully people out there in marketing aspire to have a distinctive brand.
Right.
If you want to have a distinctive brand, your communications have to be distinctive. We always do an analysis of the competitive landscape. We never want to do anything that's like anything in the category. That should be a starting point. If people can say, how can we be different? How can we do something that is completely different? You're in a great place. We actually had a we have a healthcare client. It's B2C, but it's an interesting story. And I go in there, and the CEO is this amazing guy. He's mid 60s, wears a suit, very conservative. I'm thinking this. We're kind of in trouble because this guy is going to expect typical healthcare. Smiling doctors and kissing babies. and I gave him homework. I said, everybody bring in examples of creative work that you think is good, either inside healthcare or outside category. Because I like this because it gives us some framework of where they're coming from. And so the guy shows us this video. The first one is for this cancer clinic in Toronto, and it's got a Kanye West song. And I'm like, holy cow. And then the next one was an organ donation video for Nevada called The World's Biggest Asshole. And it's this hysterical 3-minute long video about this guy who's got no redeeming values. He's just a complete jerk for 3 minutes, throwing laundry on the ground and, honking at little ladies who can't cross the street. He's just an evil guy, but he happens to be an organ donor at the end. And it is the funniest thing you've ever seen. And it is completely distinctive and arresting. And so this guy, the CEO that I'm talking about, was going against the grain. All of his peers have kissing babies and smiling doctors, and they're going to talk about their efficiency rates and their effectiveness. Right. And it's back to the magic quadrant type analogy. Mm-hmm. And this guy says, we can do that later. Let's go different. And so if you can basically be distinctive and sort of push yourself to have arresting, distinctive work, you're going to end up in a better spot. On the wall in our office, we've got this giant framed poster. It says, make them care. And, if everybody can basically aspire to that, you're going to end up with work and campaigns that are twice as effective.
That's fantastic. And, making them care is really what it's all about. And I think that's great. Tom, if someone's in the audience and they're looking to potentially have a creative partner to gain some perspective for them, what's some of the important things about those relationships to really focus on and make sure that it's a good fit?
Well, I think the fit has to be good between the client, the partner, and there has to be mutual trust and respect. And I think that's really important. We kind of do this exercise at the beginning. It's about figuring out what the client is looking for. And I think it's important because, I talked about how we're here to sort of add perspective. But it's also true that the client knows their brand backwards and forwards. So we're bringing our perspective to the table, and we're also bringing the audience's perspective. The client has, extraordinary insight into their brand and the products and their offerings and so forth. So ideally, you have this sort of relationship with all three parties sort of represented equally. And what is problematic is when you have a really hot shop, and there are a couple famous ones out there that have been like this, where they kind of, pound the table and they say, we're these guys, we can do whatever the hell we want, and you're taking dictation. And so then the agency it's not in equilibrium with it. They're too big for their britches, and the relationship goes out of sorts. So it's about having homeostasis in the ecosystem, if I can get wonky, about having balance between the parties so that everybody benefits.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Not too wonky at all. Well, Tom, thanks so much for your perspective on this. I really think that it's going to be great for our audience to consider, the human elements on their side of things when it comes to their advertising and, like you mentioned as well, content. Now, if someone's listening, what's the best way for them to connect with you and for them to find you?
That whole website thing has kind of worked out for us. So schoolofthought.com.
Beautiful.
Not School of Rock. I get that about half the time I introduce myself. People think that I'm somehow transformed into Jack Black, but no, it's School of Thought.
Schoolofthought.com. And thanks so much, Tom, for being on the show. Really appreciate all of your perspective.
My pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. You know, all those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.